1995. Okay, so if just a couple of years after the IRS victory, things are going great, guns, everybody's just peachy keen, happy. And then a woman named Lisa McPherson dies. And she dies in Scientology custody, in fact, Sea Org custody, at the Flag land base in Clearwater, Florida. The Flag base, that whole place is called Flag. And she was a public Scientologist who was, or parishioner, I guess you could say. She came out of Texas, I think, and she had traveled to Clearwater. She was going up the bridge. She had had some ups and downs and some rocky starts. She worked for a Scientologist-owned company in Clearwater, and she attested to, she did a bunch of auditing, and she got to the state where they said that she was clear, which is a mid-level, achievement that you want to get to in Scientology in order to be able to move on to those OT levels. Miscavige had personally, because he was at Flag at the time, doing inspections and whipping them into shape and doing all kinds of stuff. He was trying to get Flag into this like $1 million a week operation. He wanted them routinely making at least $1 million every week off of all the services and books and everything that they were selling. So he was hanging around there, and he'd been there for for a while. And he decided to make it his business to delve into people's files who were getting auditing. When you get auditing in Scientology, they write everything down and they put it in folders, and they got your name on the top of it. And it's you end up stacking up many, many, many folders worth of counseling notes when you're going and getting your auditing. I've got, over 50 folders with my, with all the writing of all the notes of all my sessions. So you can open these things up and look at them and see what's going on with the person and what they're saying and what's programmed for them to do next. And Miscavige got involved in that. And he personally looked at her folder and said, she's clear. You guys are stopping her from going clear. Give it to her and have her move on. And the funny thing is Miscavige isn't even trained to make that statement. He's not trained enough in Dianetics and Scientology to actually be able to make that adjudication. But who's going to question him? Exactly nobody. That's who. So she gets told she's clear. Everything's great. Everybody's happy. And I think it was a matter of days later that she has a psychotic break in the streets of Clearwater, where she is somehow involved in an auto accident or some kind of a road incident happens. And the paramedics come out, and she is standing out there in the road without any clothes on. She's taken her clothes off, and she's kind of off talking crazy stuff. And they go, okay, lady, come with us. And they take her down to the hospital. And then a bunch of Scientologists show up. They find out she's there, and Scientologists show up, and they gather her up, and they have her. They've got documents, I think, that she's already signed saying that they are her caretakers, or they can at least get her out of psychiatric evaluation. She does not consent to a psychiatric evaluation. This is all part of the contracts you sign to get auditing in Scientology in the first place, at least at this time. So they had this ability to get her out of the hospital and into their care, and they took her back to the Clearwater building, there in the Scientology building, and they started taking care of her, and they put her on what was called a baby watch. And this was part of an action in Scientology called the introspection rundown, which was something, a series of actions Hubbard developed in the early 1970s that he claimed would cure psychosis. And he literally made those claims. He said, psychotic breaks, I figured it all out. I know exactly where it comes from. And here's how you deal with people who have had a psychotic episode. And you lock them up, and you put them in a room. You don't talk to them. You don't say anything to them. You let them chill out. You feed them, and you let them calm down, and you send them notes and this kind of thing. And they started this procedure with her, but she was lost. I mean, she was not totally there. She was not eating. She wasn't sleeping well. She was having a truly psychotic episode. And this is way beyond the pay grade of Scientologists to deal with. They don't have a clue what they're doing when it comes to truly treating mental illness.
And it oftentimes requires heavy psychotropic meds and
exactly, which Scientologists are death on. They think that all of that stuff is wholly evil. Literally, they believe. I can't stress enough. I can't really get this across to people well enough with these words, but Scientologists they truly believe that psychiatry has existed for longer than this planet's been around. Mm-hmm. And they think that psychiatrists are trying to destroy civilization as we know it.
Right.
Like that is literally where their heads are at. It's bad.
Yeah.
So they're not about to let anybody get anywhere near a psychiatrist or a psychologist. And they think they know best. And they have these writings from Hubbard that say, if somebody has a psychotic break, this is what you do. So they proceed to do those things. And it's not working. This lady is lost it. And she ends up getting into this incredibly, horribly malnourished state where she's degenerating right before their eyes. They're keeping logs of this. They're trying to make this, go. But this is all happening on church property. Again, I'm skimming over a lot of stuff. There's a lot more details to all this. But the bottom line is she gets to a point where they realize she's about to die. They stick her in a car. They drive her off to, they go past the closest hospital to the Clearwater base because there's no Scientologists at this hospital. They take her to this other one, and she's pronounced dead on arrival. She died. And she died under the care of Scientologists, under Sea Org members. And this was absolutely, absolutely negligent homicide, right? There's no question about it. The coroner report lists her death as either mysterious or unknown or potentially, potential wrongdoing. The coroner couldn't make the call by herself that this was actually a homicide. They started a police investigation, of course, starts. And the church goes absolutely bonkers, shredding documents, shredding evidence. Marty Rathbun, who was a former Scientologist Sea Org member, second under David Miscavige. He was sort of, if you remember Pulp Fiction, the Wolfman, the guy who Harvey Keitel plays who comes in and cleans up the messes.
Yeah.
That's the role Marty Rathbun played for a lot of David Miscavige's messes. And this was probably the biggest one. And he comes in there and they shred a bunch of the logs and documents and incriminating stuff. And they have to protect the first priority, of course, is protect David Miscavige. And the second priority is protect the church. And this whole fiasco goes on for about a year of investigations and back and forth. The Clearwater police, I'm not going to comment on their investigation of this issue, but I will say that the Clearwater police are pretty bought off by Scientology. And as a general situation, that has been a problem for a long time. So, and there's various ways they do it. I'm not saying they have to hand them envelopes of money under the table. There are ways of handing police officers money on top of the table that is perfectly legal that gets them into a biased, prejudiced frame of mind towards the group that's paying them money. And that is how Scientology operates. They don't have to break the law. They can do it within the confines of the law.
And this is the area where it always gets complicated because on the one hand, who can deny that money and power and influence can go as far as to influence the workings of a police force? Like, of course, we have a long history in the United States of corruption at times at all levels of all types of organizations. On the other hand, as I've been exploring a totally different but related subject in Mormonism that we referenced last time, which was this satanic ritual abuse stuff, when people start hating an organization and trying to do what I call criminology, which is to figure out the inner workings of a secret organization. It's not what I call criminology. It's what I understand, is known to be this sort of trying to figure out what secret organizations do. It becomes very easy to have all these conspiracy theories rise up where everybody's bought off and everybody's corrupt. And sometimes it's hard to know what's real. Is that true?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely, that is true.
And it's easy for someone who hates Scientology to see the corruption everywhere when in some cases there may be more to the picture. They just don't have all the evidence.
Well, exactly. And I'm death on conspiracy theory. I really hate that stuff. So
Hey, you almost swore. You almost swore on Mormon Stories podcast.
So I'm kind of death on that stuff.
That's okay. That's okay. You're allowed to swear if you need to.
Okay, good. Well, most of it's bullshit, right? a lot of global, and I try to differentiate between conspiracy theory and global conspiracy theory. And I'm not going to get into a big segue on this, but I'm just going to say, when you talk about the Illuminati, you're talking about global conspiracies. When you talk about the Tuskegee experiments, or you talk about Operation Paperclip, or you talk about these kind of things, that really happened. We have the documentation. We know what went down. So I'm not talking about those things. I'm not denying that those things happen. But if you're going to start talking about 12 men running the world through media conglomerates, and they pull the strings of power, and they're the ones who determine what's on the headline of the New York Times every day, I'm going to start questioning the validity of your thinking, because that's just too crazy. So I differentiate those things, and sometimes people who are sloppy, conspiracy type thinkers don't see me differentiating those two things. So I want to make that clear right away. With the police department of Clearwater, what I'm talking about, and this is the same thing with the LAPD, you can hire off-duty police officers, and you can pay them however much you want to for them to do guard duty for your events. I can't think of a better way to open the door to corrupting a police officer than paying them money for their off-duty time to act as a police officer. They come in uniform, they come in their motorcycles, they act in an official capacity, even though they're off-duty.
Right. So police officers are allowed to get side gigs. Is that what you're saying?
Yes.
And if Scientology is hiring a bunch of them as security guards, then they've got a side gig that's bringing in important income to their family. And of course, that has the potential of influencing how they would treat Scientology.
Right away.
Right.
There's no way it doesn't bias any human being. There's just no way. Once you start paying somebody money, they are forced to think better of you.
Yeah, and it's not even like overt corruption. It's just this quote.
No.
It's this quote, it's impossible to get a man to see a point of view when his livelihood depends on not seeing it. It's more just like, that's a case I'm not going to take because it doesn't look legitimate, when really it's not always overt corruption. It's just confirmation bias. It's like, oh, those guys are my friends. They wouldn't do that, right?
Exactly. That's how subtle it can be.
Yeah.
It's perfectly legal.
Yeah.
There's nothing illegal about doing that. And yet, how could it not have a corrupting influence on the people involved?
Right. Yeah.
Right. And how could the church possibly be doing that for any other reason than to corrupt those cops? Because they could hire their own private security anytime they wanted. But they hire the cops. Why? Right?
Yeah.
Plus the front group programs they do, they come around with the way to happiness and the anti-drug stuff, and the cops eat that shit up. And they don't look any farther into it than the surface level. They go, well, this looks good, it sounds good, so these people must be good. And it's just a wrong calculation on their part. So it's not a matter of having a bunch of evil, malicious cops who are, twirling their mustaches while they, look the other way. It doesn't have to be that heavy-handed at all.